Oh, hello. I didn't see you come in. I was so engrossed in all of my numbers. I have lots of numbers for today's episode. We're going to be talking about a problem that is manifold. Now, manifold means it has many different dimensions and parts to it. When a problem is manifold, it's important to remember that usually the solution is also manifold. It's not going to be a one band-aid and we're done kind of thing. Today's manifold problem is the housing market. We're going to talk about the national housing market, the causes, how we got here, and some ways we might be able to get out of it. We're going to have a special focus on Las Vegas because I'm pretty familiar with it. It's where I live. So with that said, weekly dad news. Let's go! So, mom and dad, don't worry too many about these. I don't actually have to wear glasses. I was doing them for the effect. They're little, they're blue light glasses, so I'm fine there. The LASIK's holding. It's doing very well. So who am I to talk about housing? Like many of the episodes we've already had, who cares? I mean, I could jump in and find this data and have opinions on it, but I will qualify this one because I'm kind of wading into a thick layer of stuff that's kind of messy. I have owned 3 houses. The first one I lived in and then I rented, and then I sold it. The second one I lived in and then I rented and I still have it. And the third one is the one I'm in now. This is one of my favorite houses, probably my dream house, and I'll probably stay here forever unless there's some drastic shift. So I've been on that side. I rented a house when I was in college. I rented an apartment when I was in grad school. And then I lived with my parents in between those, and I've been kind of all over in the housing game. So I have multiple perspectives there. I've helped my dad put a second story on our house while I was growing up. So I've done some building stuff and watched the inspections, and I watched my dad hand draw plans for the thing. I know how to get my plans from the city. I've done that. I've done construction on this house. I have solar, I've done stuff in the backyard, I've redone my kitchen. So I have some grasp of that. But I think one of the largest set of qualifiers for this is that I've been in marketing for real estate for almost 10 years. I was the vice president of marketing for American Homes for Rent, which will come up later. I was the vice president of marketing for Poplar Homes, which was a third-party property management company. And while I was doing that, I sat on the Zillow single-family rental advisory board for about 6 years. So I've been in this. I've talked policy, I've talked strategy, I've seen what's happening behind the curtain, and I've seen what's happening in front of the curtain. So that's where I qualify myself and say, let's talk about it. Now, one of the things that we bump into right now at this point in time is something that started a couple of years ago in New York and now has gone nationwide, which is the rent is too damn high. There was even a rent is too damn high party in New York. Now it feels like the rent is too damn high party is almost nationwide, and everybody's kind of thinking about it. With that said, rent being high is not universal. So also recognize when I'm talking about these numbers and this stuff, it may not directly relate to you, but these are general numbers that we can use to gauge the economy. When I talk about some specific places, you'll see why they are outliers and the different things that they affect them. So keep that in mind as well. Now, as I said before the kick, the problem is manifold. And these numbers tell the story of those manifold causes. We're going to go through them. We're going to go through some myths about them and kind of put them all together into a coherent package so we can start assessing how we pull that package apart and address all the bits inside of it. With that in mind, let's go. Let's start with the building code. So the first American building code came about in 1905, and it was an insurance company that put it forward. It said basically, your house has to qualify in this way or be built in this way, and we'll insure it. If not, we got to come look at it and figure it the hell out, and we don't know if it's worth insuring. So it came about as a piece for insurers to be able to know whether or not they could do a house. It stayed that way for quite some time, and then eventually it started to become regional. So you'd have different building codes in different areas of the country. You'd even have addendums or individuals by state and by county. Eventually, we got together and put together what we call the International Building Code. Before that was the Universal Building Code, but now it's the International Building Code. And it's complex because not only does it address how a home should be built for occupancy, but how a home should be built to be fire safe and electrical safe and water safe and built to last a reasonable amount of time so insurers can kind of know what they're getting into. To give you an idea, this is the American Electrician's Handbook. This sucker checks in at like 30 pages of index, but it doesn't have actual pages. It's all like 9-, 2-, 7-, so it's zones and codes and sections, but this one's more robust because it deals with all things electricity. So this is the broad set, and the building code is a little teeny subset of this. There are books like this that show you how to put houses together. They have little drawings that show how things are supposed to work. They're very useful for figuring out how to be an actual person who builds. And then there are shorthands like this. This is code check. And code check is just a quick grab where you go in and you check off different parts of the building code. It's kind of like a reference. It tells you where to look. The building code itself is quite robust and addresses different conditions. If you live somewhere where the ground freezes, the freeze of the ground can push your house out of the ground, so you have to get below the frost line. Las Vegas, we don't really have that much water in the ground and we don't freeze, so we don't worry about it. But Reno, Northern Nevada, does. So as the building code changes, houses become more or less durable, right? So how long a house can last depends not only on how it is built, but on where it is built. Places that have more rain, more hail, more snow, more extremes of temperature take a heavier toll on a house. They take a heavier toll on a roof, wood siding, plaster, and all these things go into consideration now when you're trying to figure out if you're going to buy a house. Why does that matter? Because this is the first key component of this whole thing of rental prices, rental home prices, and actual purchasing a home prices. It has to do with the supply and how our supply is developed and how long our supply can last. My dad grew up in Iowa, Jefferson, Iowa, and while he was there, my grandfather built an extra room onto the house they were renting so they'd have more space. I don't think he was following the building code. And I don't know if that building is still there. I'll bet it's not, because that was 1959 maybe, 1955, so it's been a while. Now, does a house built by one dude in Iowa, not to code, make it 70 years? I don't know. Dad, you can tell me if it's still there or not. I don't know. I think we looked and you could see the yard, but I don't remember it being there. So there's that kind of stuff where it lasts that long. The other one is that houses will burn down in fires. Houses will be shaken apart by earthquakes. Houses will be flooded by hurricanes. All these different things change the life of the house and take houses out of the building supply. So we have this constant cycle, right? It's very similar to the United States population. We have a birth rate and a death rate. So does the housing stock. It has an expiration date and a build date. There are houses that are condemned because they haven't been taken care of. Those basic upkeep things mean that you have to keep doing stuff to the house to make sure it lasts. We saw this recently in the Surfside disaster in Florida, where the condo building wasn't maintained and it fell down and nearly 100 people died. So this stuff is actually important. As much as people go, well, it costs money, I don't have the time, I don't have the effort, I don't have the energy, then your house won't last as long. The house that my dad grew up in San Diego was built like 1960s. And he bought it for $1 on the VA bill, and they lived there. No air conditioning, it was just balloon framed. They threw trusses across the top, and when they built the walls on the inside, some of the 2x4s were stacks of drywall. We had no idea until we went in to insulate it so that my grandma was more comfortable in the summertime. But 2x4, stacks of 2x4, drywall, stacks of drywall. That's what they used for 2x4s. That house, though, is still there 70 years later, 60 years later right now, and it's doing very well, in large part because it's in San Diego and it's been taken care of. We re-roofed the thing ourselves, we cut the trees in the backyard, and when it came time to make my grandma comfortable, we put AC in, we cleaned everything up, painted, did the kitchens, So keep that part in mind about housing stock, because that ties into our first number. The first number we're going to talk about is residential housing units started by time. There's two numbers that indicate how quickly the population is growing. One is the actual count of US households and the number of people, right? So we have the census and we have the American Community Survey that give us those numbers. We also have the jobs report. And when the jobs report is saying this many jobs were created, this many jobs were created, those three things give us a really good idea of not only how many households there are, but how many incomes in those households there are. So you get median household incomes, you get number of households, and those numbers keep going up. We continue to grow our population. The population change over time is insane. And as we continue to grow, we need that number of more houses. When we look at the number of houses that were started, furthest back I could find reliable records that aligned with everything else was in the 80s. So in 1980, we started 855,000 housing units. What that means is they were permitted, they put a shovel in the ground. Now, most of those made it to completion, but sometimes houses don't get finished. Either way, we'll stay with the headline number, 855,000 in 1980. Our peak was in 2005 at 1.7 million started. So you have this ramp up, this pullback, and then this ramp up again, and they go in line with recessions, and they go in line with the federal funds rate, because that's what people use to base their mortgage rates off of. After 2005, we see a slight pullback to 1.4 in 2006. In 2007, we see 1 million. And then in 2009, we've dropped to 600,000. In 2009, we're below the level we were building in 1980. Throughout the 80s, as I look at these numbers, the lowest was 663, but most were over 1 million. In the decade starting in 2008, nothing over 1 million. 600,000, 700,000, 800,000. At the same time, our population is growing. That's that pressure buildup. This is that pressure bubble. So we come out of the 2008 crash where there was a credit issue, right? They were giving people that couldn't qualify money for houses. It was the you don't even have to prove anything. Just say you make money and you can have a loan, because we're going to package it up and throw it away to the banks. Once we got through that, and the generation that wasn't affected by it, and the generation that had finally cleared their credit from a bankruptcy, an eviction, or a jingle key, they give the mortgage back, right? So a default. Once we get through that, now we have all this pressure built up, and we have a whole new generation of people that have come up and are ready to start their lives, but haven't quite been able to. Plus, and in that I mean the people that were starting work in 2007, 2008, which I count myself part of that group. I got lucky, and we won't talk about my specific circumstances. We can, you've heard them somewhere on here, I'm sure. But my point is there were a lot of people that came into the market and went, hey, there's no jobs, there's no housing, what's happening? Why can't I get a loan? Mortgage lenders stopped lending, everything tightened up. And over that 10-year period, you get this concentration of people that are coming of age to start a life, unable to start a life. Some percentage of those were, but you've got a 10-year buildup, right? And that hits in about 2018, 19. They're really sitting there waiting, ready. But most of them are renting because that's what they can afford. Most of them are renting because they're not really sure where they're going to be. They want to be able to take a job and move somewhere else. So when they move into it, there is not enough supply. And they move into it when they realize how cheap money is in 2020 and 2021. That's the big push on that explosion. People that had been waiting for opportunity had one. And because they had it and they grabbed it so tight, you have this shift in supply where everybody's kind of living still at home. You had a huge number of people in their 30s still living at home. You had a huge number of people in their 20s living at home. Heck, you had people in their 40s living at home. And by home, I mean their parents' home, not their home. And that pushes demand where there is no supply because they can finally afford it. Regional supply shifts as well. Regional supply shifts because during COVID, the ability to work remotely tears off at mask and goes, I was here the whole time, ha ha, because it was. In the last 10 years, we've had so much technology inside of the office that allows us to do meetings with people across the country, across the globe. And those technologies mean that even if you're in the office, you're working remote. So when COVID hit and forced us to reevaluate stuff, it turned out a lot of us were quite successful at going home and doing our jobs. And then we looked around and went, well, I don't want to be in a 2-bedroom apartment with me, my significant other, and our kids while they're going to school remote and we're going to work remote. We need more space. Adds to the pressure. So these are all things that I think you guys have heard before, right? That's part of the narrative that's out there. But I think these numbers are shocking. That we retreated to 1980s levels of building while having 2008 to 2018 levels of population growth. That's mental. So now we come to the next bit. The supply lines and the trades. The supply lines are getting all the goods here, right? It's all the stuff that shows up in Home Depot. It's all the stuff that shows up at Lowe's. It's all the stuff that shows up to make houses. It's all the places that make lumber, that make concrete, that make all these different things. When you're talking about those, you have the slowdown in building that happens in 2008. So now the supply lines are used to supporting less than 1 million homes built a year, plus people doing renovations, put a granny flat on, that kind of stuff. Then COVID hits. And all these companies have been training and working towards just-in-time delivery. What that means is they have a pipeline where the tree is cut down, it's turned into plywood, the plywood is put on a container ship, the container ship gets to a truck, the truck takes it to a distribution place, the distribution place doesn't hold on to it. It sends it out real quick, gets on another truck, goes to building sites or Home Depot or Lowe's, and there's only so much they want to have on stock at any given time. And they plan on how much their normal throughput is to know what they need to take delivery of. All the companies at the top of that have a choice when the world shuts down. And a lot of them go, we're not taking the monetary risk that we're going to be stuck with this. And this makes sense from a business point of view. Because from a business point of view, you have the time when oil went negative because nobody was driving, nobody was going anywhere, there were no container ships. So what if plywood went negative? What if they were trying to pay you 2 for 1 on plywood? It'd be amazing. Everybody'd love it. But they'd lose money and you might lose a supplier, right? So this is one of the free market things that's so kind of hairy in this. So those building supply lines get all messed up. And then our housing starts jump from 500,000 in 2012. They slowly climb until they're at over 1 million again in 2020, 2021, and 2022. So we're seeing a 100% increase from the low, doubling the amount of output they need to put out, and 10 to 20% over what they were used to doing. That's why everything costs so much. That's why everything was hard to get a hold of. That's why there are backlogs on appliances for 2-3 years. That affects everybody across the building spectrum. It affects independent builders, it affects the big corporate builders, it affects people trying to build their own house, it affects remodelers. It affects everybody, right? The other thing you have during that 10 years, when you're building fewer homes, the trades get gutted. And you come out of those 10 years with fewer people in the trades, fewer people apprenticed in the trades, and the union's reporting some of their lowest membership ever because people didn't have work and moved on and got something else. And so the ones that are there are suddenly in high demand and they're able to command a higher price. Labor goes through the roof. Construction goes through the roof. I was at a job site a couple of days ago talking to guys that were putting together homes, and they were saying they're still experiencing it. So our supply lines haven't shaken out, and our building utility, like our people, haven't shaken out. Those are two that are still sticking around. And that doesn't matter if you're building an apartment building, if you're building a condo complex, if you're building housing, if you're building, heck, even if you're building commercial, you're still affected by these constrictions, these tight constrictions. I say these first because I believe that those things are the most fundamental issue pushing up housing cost right now. I think they account for a larger portion of the housing and rental price increase than almost anything else, with the slight exception of interest rates. And we're gonna get to that in just a second. But those two things have made the underlying cost of a property rehab, or any kind of building really expensive. Let's take a second now and address that next number, the mortgage rate. So mortgage rates today, when I last looked, were just under 7%. That's very high for me historically. Like I got dumb lucky in a couple of ways, right? So I didn't time my purchase against mortgage rates. I bought my first property and my initial loan was at almost 8%, and that was in 2008. But the price kept going down, so I was able to refi it a couple years later for 5%. 5% is a great rate. My parents back in the 70s were paying somewhere in the teens. It was like somewhere between 12 and 14%. It's crazy. It's so crazy. If you start looking at how rates affect it, I looked at what the estimated mortgage rate was. So I took the federal funds rate plus 2 and about a half, because that's about where it lands on historical average. I looked at what a monthly would be with 20% down. So I did the calculation for, PMI, or excuse me, for the mortgage and what it'd be. And then what percentage of salary it is. Normalized for $2022. So I had to do that because all the 24 numbers aren't in at all. 23 was just getting put together. And so I had $22. So in 1980, the estimated mortgage rate was 15%. You're paying about 45% of your salary. So it was very difficult to buy, but it dropped pretty quickly by 1986. So you get to the end of that, so Reagan's gotten in office and it's pretty high, and he's worked on it and it's come down, and it went from a high of around just a whisker below 19. Like it was getting up in 16, 17, 18, and then it came down, and by 1986, it was 9%. And the difference between 15% and 9%, 15% takes 45% of your salary, and 9% takes 28. That's a big jump. Those 6 points seem pretty big now, don't they? 600 basis, but whatever. So you see this fluctuation, and you see this up and down, this back and forth. And when the recommendation is 30% or less should be spent on housing, right? We have, starting in 1990 until 2022, based on the federal funds and then extrapolating to the mortgage rate, based on the median household income, we have 30 years where it's possible. Even when stuff explodes and then crashes, there's just 2 years where it bumps up, and that's 6 and 7. And that's at the very height, and it didn't last long. So to be fair, it's 28 years of those 30. Some of those are at 17%, some are at 18. There are a lot at 25 and 26 earlier on, but you see that flow. And then we get to this spot in 2020 and 2021, right? Because after the crash, the federal funds rate is kept super low. It's kept below 1% for quite a while. And then it finally starts to tick back up after inflation starts taking a bite out of everything in COVID. And we go from a mortgage rate of 2.5, 2.7, 4, 6.8, 7.6. And that jump there, let's start. I'm going to go with 2020 first. So in 2020, across the whole year, an average of 19% of your salary based on median income. 21, 19% of your salary. 22, 25% of your salary. 23, 37% of your salary. And 24 so far looks like 38% of your salary. Although the day I'm filming this, the Fed's meeting, and they're not cutting it now, but they may cut it pretty soon. But even if they cut it, they're going to cut it from 7.5 to 6.5, or 6.75 or 7.2. Like, they don't cut it a lot. And then the mortgage lenders cover themselves. So my point with all this is that one's huge too in terms of real money. So you've got these two things pushing on each other. Oh, the other component of this is I was normalizing against home prices, right? So I was 20% down and then your mortgage, right? So that's crazy. 2 years and you missed it. 2 years and you're out of luck. Let's talk about some of the scapegoats, because this is it. I think this is 80% of the ball game. 80% of the ball game, with 60-ish being trades and supplies, right? Those two things jack up. It's really hard to get it back on the other end. And then the interest rates being so high right now. Let's talk about some of the scapegoats. So there's two groups that kind of get called out, and I think unfairly, and I fully admit I'm an apologist in this space, and I am so because I've been a part of the National Rental Home Council. I sat on the Zillow Single Family Board. I worked for American Homes for Rent in Poplar, which, American Homes for Rent owns over 50,000 single-family rental homes in the United States. You've got the big players there, like Invitation has nearly 100,000, if they haven't passed it by now. You have these larger companies that own a bunch of properties. That doesn't mean that corporate ownership is what's smashing this up and making this difficult. I still think this stuff affects it more. I'm not saying corporate ownership has no effect. I'm saying that the amount that it contributes to the price increase is so much smaller than anybody thinks. And here's why I think that, okay? So, we have 130 million households in the United States, okay? So with that 130 million number, that accounts for the whole of the population is living in some kind of a group or single or whatever, but it's counted as a household when we do census and the American Community Survey. And here's where you're gonna think this is weird. Dig this. According to the Federal Reserve, their housing inventory estimate of total housing units in the United States is just over 145 million. What? Justin, how can this be? How can it be that we have more houses than there are households, but we don't have enough? There's a couple of pieces here. There are a lot of people that have second houses. There are a lot of people that have vacation homes. There are a lot of people that have mobile homes in the desert and live in San Diego and drive out to visit them. You've got a good portion of the population that has some weird escape or some strange family compound where the houses aren't always in use. So it gives us this 6 or 7 million extra housing units. Not to mention those that, again, this is an estimate, those that are estimated to be in circulation but are uninhabitable. Remember that this doesn't take into account all the properties that are devastated and displaced from the fire that's happening right now, the fires that have happened in the last couple of years. It's in there, but it's really hard to add it in. We have no clear way to kind of accumulate this data on the national level. We kind of take the tax rolls and go, this should be right. But there are places where people have built in the middle of nowhere. There's additional dwelling units. There's granny flats. And it doesn't mean that the houses that are there are where they need to be. Detroit went through this, where people left. There was no manufacturing, there was no nothing to support it. So you had hundreds of thousands of houses that were just empty because they were abandoned. You had apartments that were sitting empty because they were abandoned. And at any given point in time, you have transitional people that are living in one house and are about to move into another house. You have to have surplus housing units so you can move. So that's not as delimiting as you think it is. And the problem with this is that it's in the wrong direction. It makes it look like we have extra housing units, but we need all those housing units for other things. From places you can't live year round. You've heard of the snowbirds coming down from New York to hang out in Florida. You've heard of the people that go down to Arizona from Colorado or Idaho because it's freezing up there. So you have mobile population, and then you also have moving population. When you put in a deposit on another house and you're in that same one, you have two properties. And start to think about 130 million housing units, right? The rental population, that is pretty large. So you've got these 30 to 40 million renters that move on average about once every 2.5 to 3 years. You take that million and spread it across the year, you're looking at 800,000 people moving every month. That's 1 million in transit. And then you have probably another million that are being cleaned and readied. And another million. So you have this stuff, okay? So that's where it comes into the shortage. And the estimated current shortage is somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 7 million homes. That's the current estimate. And that varies by region and by location. There's places where they have extra homes, but nobody wants to be there. So that 5 to 7 million shortage is what isn't being built right now. That was a long way to say that when we talk about these numbers, remember how big they are.
45 million.
Rental households. And do you know how many single family rental households there are? About 15 million. Out of that 15 million, do you know how many are corporate landlords? Mega investors, which are investors that have over 1,000 homes. 445,000 properties. 445,000. And if you talk about the big guys, American Homes for Rent, Invitation Homes, Progress Residential, you're talking about less than 280,000 homes. You have smaller investors and local investors and trusts, so you have these groups that'll get together and buy up 2 or 3 properties, or you may know somebody who has a property and it's in an LLC and they rent it out. And that's that 15 million block. These giant corporate landlords that everybody's talking about and everybody's worried about, they're not that big. They own less than 1 million. Less than 1% of properties are owned by them. So my argument against going after them is that they don't own that many properties. And I'm going to give you something that might help you with this, and this is kind of a fun thing to do. If you go onto their websites, you can check out probably about how many properties they have in your area. Here's how you do that. They file, well, not all of them. Invitation is public and American Homes for Rent is public, so you can get it for them. But this is I feel like it's fair to go by. They are very efficient at turning properties. So at any given time, according to their filings, they're usually 95% occupied, which means about 5% of their properties are going to be vacant and available for rent on their website. If you go on their website, pick your area, and zoom in, you can see. So here's American Homes for Rent. It has around 140, 150 on site. If that's 5%, they have around 3,000 homes in Las Vegas. What I'll say about those 3,000 homes is it's a very, very, very small portion of the 190,000 total housing units in Las Vegas. Invitation, about 125 on site, 125, 130, so a little under 3K. Progress has about 200 on site, so they have about 4K. So between those 3 big ones, you're looking at 11,000 out of 190,000. So how does that corporate block compare to the single family rental house? And remember, we're not talking apartments, single family rental house market in Vegas. This is where you can jump over to Zillow. And if you jump over to Zillow, there's 3,305 total single family homes available for rental. Now, mom and pops are less efficient than the big guys, so let's go big. And let's say they have a 10% vacancy rate on average, a little bit less maybe. Even so, we're talking about 30,000 houses. 30,000 out of 190,000. That's the single family rental market in Las Vegas. And Las Vegas has a very vibrant single family rental market, and it has for years. Because you have a whole lot of people that come here to do shows. You have a whole lot of people that come here to move and set up for a while and see if it works. It's a very transient county. And so as people come in and out of the county, they're living in apartments or they're living in these houses. And I think that plays a lot into what we need housing to be and what we want it to be. The Las Vegas Review-Journal, in analyzing our housing market in Las Vegas, says we're about 50,000 housing units, that's apartments and houses, short. We're 78,000 if you want to count in affordable units, which means that we have more housing for people that can afford it than for those that don't. So this compounds the problem as well. You look at Clark County as a total, and it's different than Las Vegas. Clark County as a whole, it's giant. So Las Vegas is just a little piece. Clark County is pretty much the lower bit where Las Vegas is. It's nearly 8,000 square miles. It holds 2.3 million people. It has 917,000 housing units. It has over 860,000 households. Now again, we have this mismatch between number of housing units available and the housing that's being occupied. But that's also because of people moving. That's because of people that come in for a while. That's second houses. That's a lot of reasons. So we still need more. We want more housing. The other one that gets victimized unfairly, I believe, is Airbnb. Airbnb is consistently claims to be taking properties. And I think the place where it's most obvious that this is difficult is places where building isn't possible and it's a very high tourist town. Jackson Hole, Wyoming, is one of the worst offenders. Between VRBO and Airbnb, they've wiped out any kind of housing for people that need to work and live there. This was especially exacerbated when they had the freeway collapse and all the people that drive into town couldn't. So all the vacationers and all the rich people didn't have anybody to make their coffee and serve them lunch and build more housing. But that's specifically because Jackson Hole doesn't have any more housing. It doesn't have any kind of a space to grow. And I will say that Airbnb does have an effect on where you can buy sometimes or where it's available. Let's talk about the last one that I think is fairly a part of the problem. And that's something that came up in the last couple of years with a thing called RealPage. This is the company, and they have a thing called YieldStar. What YieldStar does is it aggregates, I'll do it this way. If you install it into the software that manages your apartment complex, it will tell you the best rent rate to try and get the best revenue maximization. It means to make the most money over the long term. And one of the things that upended was the practice of trying to keep the property full. So instead of keeping the property as close to 100% as you could, YieldStar would say, if you wait 2-3 months and get this higher rate, you'll make more money long term. It's accurate, the math works out, but it removed the discretion for the leasing agents and kind of put it entirely in this algorithmic space. Not a horrible idea, not a great idea. It's very capitalist, massive market economy piece. Where it got complicated is that everybody that plugged in to YieldStar, their data was getting aggregated. And when their data was getting aggregated, all of a sudden, instead of having properties competing on price, you have properties holding price and waiting for you to buckle. And all of them were together. This is one of those things that's like a monopoly, but not. It's where all of the people that are providing the good get together and say, won't sell unless you pay this much. And that's why they're being sued. So, from a ProPublica report, in Boston, renter Kaylee Hutchinson said she was puzzled when her landlord, unbeknownst to her, a RealPage client, told her days into the first pandemic lockdowns that her rent was going up. Building staff insisted the market rate was 6.5% higher than she was paying, despite looking around and people were leaving the city. A few weeks later, she and her fiance saw a newly vacant unit in their building advertised online for less. One of their landlord's policies permitted moving to another unit, so they did. And that's the kicker on this too, is that RealPage was actually calculating in how much it costs to move and how much of an inconvenience it is, and going, well, you can probably raise the rent by this much and they won't move because it's a pain in the butt. If you're moving building to building, it is. If you're moving next door, it's not so bad. But you still are paying overlapping rents, having to sign new leases, change all the information on your things. So that abuse of the power imbalance is what is getting YieldStar in trouble, and they're getting sued. There's a court case going on. Unimpeded by human worries, YieldStar's price increases sometimes led to more tenants leaving because they wanted to get pricing off site and make it just totally a rational thing, rational, not irrational, a rational thing. And by over-rationalizing it, they remove the human component. They remove the understanding and discussion between people about what should be and where it should be. And I think that when people are scapegoating single-family rentals, they don't realize how much they're influenced by apartments. So if apartments, a 3-bedroom, 2-bath apartment unit is renting for, say, $2,000, and a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house with a garage, a yard, and no shared walls with neighbors, you can get $2,500, $2,700 if it's real nice. And so you have that delta. And so as single family rentals sit on top of the apartment supply, which is huge, in any city it almost always outstrips the single family rental supply, you get that delta. And the single family rental companies aren't equipped to use YieldStar and RealPage because they don't have the data. I guarantee you they're trying. But all of these companies, American Homes for Rent, Poplar, Invitation Homes, Rent Progress Residential, all of these companies have internal pricing algorithms that go, how many people have looked at the property, how long has it been on the market, and is anybody applying yet? And after a certain amount of time, if nothing's happened, the rent goes down. Now that we've doom and gloomed a little bit and talked about how we got here, let's talk about a little bit about how we get out of here. And I think Las Vegas is a specifically nice place to talk about it because we have a whole bunch of different issues that have compounded this. One of the first ones is land use regulations here. Now we're surrounded on all sides by what's called BLM land, Bureau of Land Management, which means the federal government owns it. Some of it, we have little bits of county land and little bits all around. We have state parks and national parks nearby. But at the end of the day, we're running out of land faster than we're running out of water. And we're doing pretty good on water. Let's talk about two different land use issues. The first one we're going to talk about is near Red Rock. And it's a place called Blue Diamond Hill. Let's take a look. In the southwest of Vegas, if you go down Blue Diamond, you're going to run into a place about a third of the way between Las Vegas and Pahrump. State Route 159, which I'm on now, that's the traffic you hear. But on State Route 159, which goes in and cuts around and becomes the Red Rock Loop, one of the most scenic drives in all of Las Vegas. Out here, there's a mine on the top of this hill behind me called the Blue Diamond Hill Mine. It's owned by a guy named Jim Rhodes. And one of the things that's kind of neat about where this mine is at is it blocks the entire city of Vegas from Red Rock. So when you're in Red Rock and driving or hiking on the scenic loop, you cannot see anything of Vegas. You can't see the Strip, you can't see houses, you can't see nothing. It's like you're in, it is a park. It's a state park, national park. It's right there and it's gorgeous. But this bluff that blocks it and that mine on top of it, it's been a gypsum mine for years. It's owned by a guy named Jim Rhodes, who developed Rhodes Ranch, Tuscany Village, put together a company called Harmony Homes to buy homes in 2008. Those developments are in the city and are well respected. The people that live there love them. But here, on this gypsum mine he owns, he wants to build more houses. He wants to do a whole development on top of this mountain. Those houses then will be visible from Red Rock, and they'll have amazing views. You look one direction and you can see the sun set over Red Rock. You look the other direction, you can see the sun rise over Las Vegas. So these homes are going to be very much in demand. Now the county tried to stop it, and there was even a nonprofit group that was working towards stopping it and saving Red Rock Canyon. The problem is, one of the guys involved in that, Justin Jones, got elected to county commissioner, and when he did, there was a court case over his involvement in that, and he had deleted some text messages that referred to that. So they end up settling out, and so they settled this case out, and now there will be homes up here. But the settlement includes a couple of good things for us, and this is where compromise comes into play in these things. We are going to keep growing, keep building, keep expanding. I don't like that we're gonna lose some of the gorgeous views that we had from Red Rock, but if we're gonna develop here, at least we're setting up to do it a little bit better. The settlement gives us a couple of things. There's one of the trucks going in. The settlement gives us a couple of things. It's an $80 million settlement, but it was looking like it would have been a $4 billion loss. So in that $80 million settlement, for $1, the county gets 192 of the acres that are up here. They also got them to move the access from this side where it's on the 159 and going towards Red Rock Loop to being on the other side and going out to Blue Diamond. They'll also be tying into sewer and water systems so they won't be up here on pumps and wells and septic. That's good, but it's still challenging because we're losing and encroaching on this natural beauty that we still have and are trying to preserve. As we try and preserve that beauty, we're going to continue to compromise. There's some places where there's been so much money and power put behind it that people have gotten private little spaces in Jackson Hole out in the national park areas. So this is an example of one of the ways that it's really hard to balance the commercial and capital needs of investors and developers with what we could do. This is not going to be affordable housing. These will be very expensive homes. They're going to be unique to Las Vegas and unique to this area. There will be 3,000 of them. Original plans were 5,000. Settlement cut it down to 3. But those 3,000 homes now are going to be very valuable. So I think this one's interesting for the split between we do need houses, but do we need $3,000 million plus houses that kind of ruin the view from a park, like specifically a national park? On the other side, though, we do have a different kind of mine right in the heart of Vegas, like smack dab in the middle of it. And that is taking a totally different approach. Here it is. Over my shoulder here, you can see some gravel processing equipment, and this big wall over here hides one of the weirdest, coolest things in Las Vegas. There's actually a giant pit behind this wall, and there's 2 of them. They're owned by a company called Wells Cargo. One of them, they've fully excavated and are now filling back in. They fill it in whenever they do demos, so it's got parts of the dunes, parts of, people get pools dug in their backyard, it's got the sands. The Flamingo is probably gonna be the next one to go in there. This is the one that's still active, and this one they're still cutting down. It's 200 feet deep and they keep going. And what's also cool and pretty sustainable about this is as they fill them back in, they're building homes on them. So one of the pits is half full, and they've already put a whole bunch of houses on top of it. That's the plan for the other pits as well. But this is one of the most sustainable things in Las Vegas. What happens is they take what's in these pits, crunch it up into gravel, and pretty much anywhere you see asphalt in Las Vegas came from one of these 2 pits. Then, when they're digging stuff out, trenching, flattening land, they bring all that back in and put it back in the hole. So it's this cycle that stays in the city, and it's a really sustainable use of the space. Now, you're probably asking yourself, why is it in the middle of the city? Why does it sit where it does? That's because of the way it started. In 1954, the site was chosen. At that point, the population was around 30,000. Now, 70 years later, we're at almost 2 million. So originally it was far away, we grew to enclose it, and they've just kept working with it. They've got the streets made so that they can bring stuff in. They've got the processing right here. So these giant trucks don't have to drive in from other states. They don't have to bring it in. It's a fantastic example of how you can use stuff in the land, put it back, and then just put more houses on it. So that's a super different approach to it, right? They got enveloped by the city, cooperated with the city, helped the city grow, helped the city scoop stuff up and dump it out. They even got they even have parts of the Raiders Stadium foundation dig in there. Like it's if you went in there, it's archaeologically, it's probably phenomenal. So you've got that. So we start talking about these solutions and we start running into a thing called NIMBY, right? Not in my backyard. And that's when people go, we do need more apartments. We need more affordable housing. but I don't want it in my backyard. But as we look around at this land and the ability to use it as it is needed and to the benefit of all, and by the benefit of all, I mean that not only does affordable housing help those that need more affordable housing, it helps the people that are already in those neighborhoods. You strengthen connections, your kids go to school together, you start having this synergy that helps all the people be better people, and I truly believe that. So let's take a look at where we're going to be putting affordable housing in Vegas as we move forward. We're here on Cactus near Mountain's Edge. This is pretty far south in Las Vegas, but this lot is one of the first ones that's been designated for affordable housing. Biden announced it when he was down here recently. Behind me, we have about 20 acres. It's a block of infill. So it's housing that's been surrounded by developments. In every direction there's houses. There's really nice places over on this side, even on the other side. But then this area, this whole area is just dirt. So what they did is they took and they said, this can be developed for affordable housing. And that affordable housing, we don't know exactly the shape it'll take yet, but we're starting to do things like that. Besides this project, there's another project that's working on getting donations to build affordable housing. All of these things kind of have to work together. We need a kind of ladder to home ownership that's different than buying a starter home, going to the next home, going to the next home. In this case, we want a transitional housing plan for everybody, which means people that are underhoused, which means that there's too many people living in one house. Think a large family of say 2 parents and 4 kids in a 3-bedroom apartment, or in other cases, homeless people who need transitional housing to get out of living in their cars or tents. So something small just to stabilize them, then move into something larger and something larger. The number of properties that are built overbuilt. A lot of the properties around here, these houses go for $430,000 to $600,000. And that cost kind of sets it up so that you can't access these. But if you put affordable housing communities nested inside of larger developed communities, you get all the benefits of the larger tax base for everybody. So that school money gets distributed better, and the property's amenities all kind of share in that good space and piece of community. So that's what this is going to be. This is one of the things we're on the way to affordable housing in Clark County. So in addition to that, there's several other sites that are up for nomination and probably will win out a bunch more contracts. And then we'll have more and more affordable housing. That'll help with that lack of units, something like 78,000 when they're included. So 28,000 affordable housing units. But as we move towards that, we're still going to be growing. So the goal is to get building to outpace growing. Well, how do we do that when our supply lines are so tight and the trades cost so much? Well, one of the people contributing to the housing supply is the big corporate landlords. In the last 8 years, they haven't just been buying houses that go to market, they've been building houses specifically to rent. It's called build to rent programs. You can go on their websites now and see it, see where they're building it, see where they're coming, and they have huge stockpiles of land and materials to do this with. They're still being affected by the tightening, but here's what those communities look like as they're being built. These homes behind me in this whole development are being built by AMH Development, which is a subsidiary of American Homes for Rent. They basically build homes specifically to rent. All of their lots that they're using are infill lots. Some of them are surplus lots, but a lot of them are out on the edge. This one's just down the street on Cactus from the affordable home lot that's being earmarked for development. And one thing you'll notice about these houses when you come and tour them, if you're renting, I don't think you shouldn't go tour them, is that a lot of them are made with nicer materials and they're built to be rented, which means they have laminate flooring that's easy to replace. They have wider staircases for moving stuff in and out. They have really durable materials throughout the whole thing. They're also really nice finishes. So they've kind of hit this compromise between durability and style, which really makes for a great house for now. And then if they ever decide to sell them, they're gonna be adding to the amount of homes that are available. Now, one of the things that people will say about these groups that are putting all these homes in is that they're just putting way too much in. They're taking control of the thing. Well, right now, all of the builders are building as much as they possibly can in the Las Vegas area. And these guys building as well isn't taking away from them, it's adding to the supply. If we want to lower housing, we need to increase the supply as fast as possible. So I have more to say about that, and I'll turn it back to the library to talk about it, but when you're thinking about these homes, just recognize that they're nice. These aren't the ones you're used to. When you think of the big corporate landlords, you go, they beat me at auction, they're buying all the starter homes. That's not all they're doing. They're at over 10,000 homes that they've built for rentals. And a lot of these are in larger communities, say 150, 200. So you get amenities as well. You get pools and children's parks and community centers. So it's more like apartment living where you don't share walls. It's a different product than we're used to or have ever had on the market. I played those two next to each other on purpose because they're less than a mile apart from each other, the affordable housing place and the American Homes for Rent build to rent. And I think it highlights this NIMBY stuff where you go, I don't want affordable housing. Okay, you might be able to fight that because the county's got a hand directly in it, but you're not going to be able to fight build to rent. What I will say though is one of the things build to rent has really highlighted is that when people get all upset about it looks like renters live here, it's not well taken care of. In these communities, they have HOAs that run the thing, they have yard services, they take care of everything. So the community stays nice. And you also drive through them and realize it's kind of a confirmation bias. Whenever you met somebody that was a renter, you're like, oh, But then you'd meet other people that were renters and it wouldn't really click because they took care of their houses like they owned it. So that's kind of on us. So affordable housing contracts, build to rents, anything that adds to the number of properties that are available to rent and to buy is going to be helpful. Because eventually there comes a point where if rents go down, American Homes for Rent might sell some of those houses. They might sell some of the houses that they have that aren't in build to rent and do more build to rent. That's going to be constant capitalism and economics for them. They'll be looking at it and assessing it and deciding what to do. But increasing the stock of properties is a good thing. There's some interesting things happening this too. So in the area of affordable housing, there's a thing that passed in California called YIMBY. So NIMBY is not in my backyard. YIMBY is God in my backyard. And they're doing special permitting where if you're a church or if you're a religious organization, you can build affordable housing on your grounds as long as you comply with certain restrictions on it, but it's a lot easier to do. You can build dormitories and take people in. And that's YIMBY, which is cool. You've got the general YIMBY movement, which is the one that fights NIMBY. NIMBY is not in my backyard, yet YIMBY is yes in my backyard. And there's a lot of work on that as a cultural movement, educating people to the benefit of having new things in the space. One of the components of YIMBY is something called BIMBY, which is business in my backyard. They got all these great names for this stuff. It's hilarious. Anything that you do with housing has to have an IMBYism. But business in my backyard is that mixed use space, right? So instead of having housing, 7-Eleven, Walmart, then way over there are the theaters and restaurants. BIMBY likes to integrate those, or even have the ability to run more businesses out of households or out of garages. And so this mixed use space thing starts developing, and it starts looking more like a European model, where there's an area where you live upstairs and downstairs are all shops and restaurants, haberdashers, people that make suits. They start doing mixed use stuff. All of this stuff, though, is reliant on zoning. And a lot of our zoning is really driven by the NIMBY crowd. And it has this effect of people going, well, I want this and I don't ever want it to change. I want the place that I bought today to be exactly the same 60 years from now. We can't do that. We have to allow for and respect change as it occurs. We have to let our communities grow. We have to let the spaces and the way that we live together grow. We have to accept work from home. We have to accept garage businesses. We have to accept that there are people that are filming content in their properties right now. They're Instagrammers and they are vloggers. They're doing YouTube stuff. So all of this is changing. And the color and tenor of our communities is changing as well. We're fighting against it as hard as we can, and I don't know why. We can change, we can grow. We've shown our capacity for that extremely well in the last couple of years. It's been drastic, but we've done it. There are a lot of people working on this too at the federal level. You have Katie Porter has introduced bills that address some of these things. There are bills, the Corporate Landlord Acts, but I don't think those are as well thought out as like what Katie Porter's proposals house. The other way to do this is to look at how we tax new builds and how we tax ongoing builds. An example of that would be, we have vacant lots all over Vegas. They're what are called infill lots, where they were built around. Whoever built that one didn't have the money to build it out, so they're just sitting on it, holding on to it. So we could generate taxes by raising the taxes on non-built infill lots. Build it or sell it, because we need it. We need it. I stopped for a minute because I started flipping through my papers. There's so much, and it's so integrated. And so what I want people to be aware of as you look at all this integrated thing is that it's this giant manifold problem. And anytime we sit here and go, I want to have a rent control ordinance passed. That's all I want, just rent control. We have to trade on these things. We have to have a manifold package to attack the manifold problem. So if we want to have some kind of rent control, that has to come hat in hand with changes in building regulations, changes in zoning regulations, changing in taxation schemas, changing in property tax schemas. We have to shift the responsibility of this to be shared and not restrictive. We have to set it up in such a way that we can do stuff like build quadplexes and build duplexes more and more so that we have those out there as a portion of the supply. We need to, in Vegas, start building up. We have very few buildings that are more than 3 stories. We have the room for it, we can. Hell, instead of filling out that hole, maybe we have a whole subterranean place where people can go and live if they work nights. Because then they come home and they don't have to see the sun, they can sleep and it'll be dark. But we have to start looking at how we're using the land and how we're sharing the land and how we're going to accommodate the more and more people that continue to be born and live here. And that's not just true for Las Vegas, that's true for the United States of America. Well, I didn't solve the housing crisis, but I sure hope you got an idea about how it works. Love you. Bye. Use it.